Welcome to Lamwyk Digital, introduced by moderator Ed Goodchild.
Welcome to our first Lamwyk Digital video, where we're going to hear from Alastair Winter, who's, as you know, a well-respected economic strategist and commentator. There's clearly lots to talk about in regard to the economy. He's got some pertinent views about what's happening now, but probably even more importantly, what we can expect to be coming down the pipe a bit later on.
I'm going to talk about three things today. I'd like to share my thoughts with you, and I hope it will help you make up your own mind on these matters. The first one is that the virus will be tamed. The second one is, but this will be at a terrible cost. And less important is that the market turmoil is far from over. So let's start with the virus. And I'm using the word tamed because it's probably not going to be completely defeated. It's not going to go away like SARS did. If you remember a few years ago, that was a big problem. But, and we're far from out of trouble, as the daily death toll still going up as we talk today. There are still shocking in the UK, shocking shortages of protective kit for the medical staff. There's a shortage of hospital facilities, although that's being worked on. And of course, there's the testing fiasco. I don't think there's any other word to describe that. But immunity is building in the community. I think there's quite a lot of evidence that actually more people have had it. There's quite a lot of medical controversy, and I am not qualified to comment on that, apart from noting that there is a controversy. But what we do know is that when any virus like this, a serum is developed fairly quickly, and we're probably talking about a few weeks, which will actually be a cure, not perhaps for everyone, alas, but for most people. A vaccine is going to take longer. We're talking about months there. And an awkward situation is there seem to be 10 strains of the virus, which may make it difficult to find a vaccine that does the lot. Now, the thing is to get more and more information, the data gathering. And I think the big question that's still open is whether there'll be a second or third wave. And we just don't know. There's just not enough information. But just to finish on the virus, I think we know how it will end. It's just still not clear when it will happen. The second thing is I want to talk about the cost. Now, there are all sorts of fancy forecasts from everyone, and I'm not big on precise forecasts. To my mind, I like to think of things being very bad or very good. And this one, I'm afraid, is very bad. And in particular, I don't want to talk so much about GDP as about people. And there's a chart here which shows, it's on America. I've looked in vain for equivalent data for the UK, but it shows that people basically have no reserves. There's no money. They're going to run out of money very fast. Nearly half of Americans have no reserves, which is a pretty shocking figure. There's obviously a concentration on poorer people, but in fact, it's going to affect a lot wider section of the population who are professionals, and many of you, like you, who are listening to this podcast. So it's going to be very wide-ranging and affect a lot of people. Turning to companies, that's the second chart, and there's an astonishing figure there of companies that don't think they can last more than, I think it's 70%, it says, more than 6 months before they run out of, they basically go bust. And this has horrendous implications for sales networks, supply chains, and of course you come back to jobs. You say, well, okay, maybe they should borrow, but the capacity, too many people, as is shown, by these charts, many companies don't have access to borrowing, even if banks were willing to lend to them. They're already stretched. So the question is, can the government schemes help them? And both in the US, there are a lot of parallels at the moment between the US and the UK. Neither schemes are working well. They've not got off to a good start, no matter how good their intentions. And these, right, I've talked about these, but they apply to the UK, have come on top of a global slowdown in the economy. And of course, in the UK, the government has, as is its right, having won the election, pursuing an aggressive tone to the Brexit negotiations. And the problem with that is that it adds to business uncertainty. Now, the important thing about this, another quite shocking thing, is this damage to the UK economy is deliberate government policy. This is unprecedented. And you have to wonder why they've done that. And the UK came to this rather drastic policy rather late, as you can see in chart 3. I want to talk about this chart, what's not on the chart, as much as what's on it. If you look at that time scale, let's just talk about November. There is evidence of an epidemic in China, in the city of Wuhan and the Hubei province in November, early in November. In December, still not on that chart, in Taiwan, the Taiwan authorities, who come out of this whole business very well, are saying there is an epidemic coming from Wuhan. Then we move to January. Intelligence reports, the spooks are telling President Trump, they're telling Boris Johnson, there is an epidemic in China. Right? So that's early January. And that puts rather in perspective the delay in action in the UK. And of course, the US isn't even on that chart. What's even worse about the US is they had a full-scale simulation in October 2019 of a coronavirus coming out of China. I don't know about you, I find that quite shocking. And what we can conclude from all this is that there is a global recession. In fact, it's probably underway. People are falling over themselves to say how much it will be. And of course, there's also competition as to how quick the recovery will be. And there will be a recovery. That it will happen. The thing is, though, it's not going to happen at all quickly, and it's essential people get back to work as soon as possible. And I think we're now starting to see in Europe, I believe the Czech Republic is the first one to start lifting the restrictions, but there is a program in Austria and Denmark, and I believe Norway too. And the first restriction to be lifted are schools. And that's coming in some countries next week. I think there'll be later here. Next up are non-food shops. And I'm sure everyone will be relieved to hear DIY stores and gardening centers. So you'll be able to get out and get your stuff to do all the jobs you've been putting off for years, like me. After that, dentists, psychologists, hair salons. I think it'll be some time after that, cafes and pubs, and with social distancing, which in pubs is probably a contradiction in terms. But some months, I think, big sporting events, which has all sorts of implications. I think we're going to see something in the UK in May. It really will have no choice. I think they would like to have some sort of immunity system, but I think they'll go ahead even if they don't have it a fail-safe. They may have to just keep older and more vulnerable people with pre-existing conditions in safety. Right, so we're going to have no quick recovery. There's no, whatever economists say, you can't make up for, in the developed economies like ours, for the loss of the output in services, and that's chart 4. Again, you can see and this may affect many of you listening, the damage to the professional services sector. And it's pretty grim reading, and I really wish I didn't have to emphasize that. The real damage, of course, long-term damage, is to confidence, consumer confidence, business confidence. Consumers won't spend, business won't invest, people won't borrow. And that's really going to cast a big shadow on things. We are talking about years. We're not talking about recession for years, but we're talking about loss of confidence. And that I would expect to feed into markets. There was a first panic reaction when they decided the virus was really going to cause a lot of problems. And this exposed a technical problem on a shortage of dollars. Well, more than technical, but a shortage of dollars. Everyone wanted dollars at once, which caused a great deal of panic in the market. But actually, to give them their due, the Fed stepped up with that. I won't go into the details, but there were swap lines with foreign central banks, and also they changed the reserving requirements for US banks, which are very helpful to calm down. So already bank bargain hunters are out, and people are talking about, momentum, buy the stocks, buy the winners, keep going. And of course, those who are sticking with passive investment, the indices have bounced back, not of course nearly as far as they fell, but they have bounced back. And of course, people have to go somewhere to put their money. But I believe these fundamentals will kick in. You just can't ignore the fact that the economy and certain sectors and certain companies will be very badly hit. So discrimination in investing will be ever more important. And I know there are people in Lamwyk who are fund managers, and I'm sure they would say amen to that. Okay, so it's a bleak outlook short term. What I personally find really interesting is what's going to happen longer term. Debates about the role of the state, social issues, income inequality, public services, and of course climate change. And the UK, of course, will really have to decide whether it wants to keep talking tough about Brexit. So I'll end on a hopeful note. I'm hoping millennials, many of whom are you listening, and Generation Z, my kids, are going to give us oldies a hard time and demand some real change. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Alastair. Your markers on what the economic journey is going to look like are really super helpful. Harry and I are very grateful for him for speaking today, but also we've got a whole range of speakers lined up to come over the following weeks. And it's probably pertinent also to say a big thank you to Jonathan Booth, who's one of our Lamwyk members, who's been in charge of all the production and direction of this video. Thank you very much. Have a happy Easter.